Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Elizabeth Perez from All Chicago. So I'm going to look at everyone that is attending. I have everyone on mute. So, we can do, I have Carrie Thomas and Jennifer Miller and I'm sorry, I always butcher your last name, Jennifer. So we're all on the call. So I will give kind of the voice control over to Carrie and Jennifer to take us through, but today we'll be talking about the Employment and Income Refinement Workshop Summary. It's a small group, so if you have any questions, you can always feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you. If you are joining via phone, if you're joining in via your computer, just make sure your mic works because that always runs into issues. But if not, if you're going through the phone, we can easily just unmute you and you can feel free to ask your question. All right. So I'll leave it over to you, Carrie and Jennifer.
Hi, this is Carrie Thomas. I'm with the Chicago Jobs Council. Go ahead, Jennifer.
And this is Jennifer Miller-Rayfeld, and I'm with Inspiration Corporation.
So I'm sorry, Elizabeth, should I be seeing the PDF?
Oh, sorry. There we go. You should be able to see my screen
now. Great. Okay, so thanks for arranging this call. So Jennifer and I lead the employment and income line of work of the Continuum of Care's action agenda. So I know you all are familiar with the action agenda, and employment and income is one of the 12 lines of work. And the majority of the work that happens in that line is through both the Employment Task Force and 2 SOAR work groups that are led by Margaret Smith from All Chicago. So we've been working for a couple of years on a few different strategies related to increasing income, whether it's through benefits or through employment. On the employment side, we've done some fundamental things like getting a data match between HMIS and the Federal Workforce System, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We also were instrumental in getting a question on the coordinated entry assessment about employment. So we now know that about 63-64% of people who are being assessed for housing all say that they would like help finding a job. So not surprising to those of us in workforce, maybe not surprising to you, but it's the first time we actually have that information, which is helping us to think about what are the additional strategies we need to help people find employment. So this past January, we had some discretionary funding from the Pope Brothers Foundation that allowed us to bring in Heather Mueller from Clutch Consulting, who's a consultant from Houston who's actually worked with All Chicago and DFSS and the Action Agenda over the past 2 or 3 years. But she came in specifically to help us convene some of the systems level leaders to talk about our employment and income strategy and help us define a vision for that. And so that's what we did at the end of January. And then she put together sort of a presentation for us, and we've been bringing that presentation. We've been sort of on a road show to any stakeholder group that's interested in hearing about the vision for us to get some feedback and actually see if anybody would like to join the employment income line of work. So I think we can go to the next page if you can forward that. Could probably go. So this honeycomb picture is really the universe of stakeholders who have been involved in this process up till now, and in the sort of refinement workshop we're going to be talking about the results of. So providers, both housing and workforce providers, funders, both public and private, all of the implementation team of the action agenda itself, the employment task force, the SOAR work groups, the lived experience commission, etc. The next page, please. And just a reminder to all of us, we have to remind ourselves of this every day, is that this conversation and workshop we were doing this year was intended to think about some of the systems level breakdowns, really, and solutions to helping people who come through the coordinated entry system get to employment or income solutions. And so this is just a set of quotes that statements Heather puts together just to remind us that making improvements at program level or with particular procedures or that kind of thing are important, but they tend not to have as big an impact as you would have if you are changing the interconnections between systems, which is what we're trying to focus on. Okay, so the next page. Okay, you can actually probably skip. Go ahead, Jennifer.
All right, so you can skip to the next page, Elizabeth. All right. So what we did as part of the group is we really wanted to take a look at mapping out the existing workforce system. So it's a little bit hard to read on here, but I'll kind of walk through what each little section is. So the first are the points of entry. So this is where a job seeker is identifying their interest in finding work. So over on that left-hand side, we have organizations like DFSS, IDHS, schools, the Alderman's Office, 311, workforce organizations, community-based organizations, all of those places that someone might be receiving services and that they might identify an interest in finding work. The next step, so the first row of squares right there is kind of the assessment and matching process. So there's a couple different things in here. The first of which is a case manager assessment. The second is the relationship with the individual's release. So this is how somebody, actually let me go back a little bit. So this is how folks are then getting assessed and matched to workforce services. So whether it's a case manager that's doing that assessment and matching, or it's a community-based organization that has a relationship with a workforce organization, or whether it's in-reaching into those organizations. So going in and recruiting folks from those organizations where folks might be identifying that they're interested in finding work. The diamonds are kind of the screening process that may or may not happen at these organizations. The screening process could include things like funding and contract requirements, actual and perceived work requirements. So there are things like if a case manager at another organization thinks that somebody might not be ready for work, that might be where they're bringing in and saying, oh, maybe this isn't the right fit for you. But then the third thing on there is the client identified needs. And that is on the bottom a little bit on purpose, is that, you know, this is not a process that is really designed to support the job seeker and is not necessarily putting them first in kind of how we navigate them through the system. So afterwards, once the case manager's kind of done a little bit of that assessment, they're then sending the referral to the workforce organization. So whether that's through email or phone or through some web-based services that we're aware of, so NowPow and Solve are options, and also just those email referrals from larger community organizations or the community service centers. So that's how folks are getting into these diamonds. So the diamonds are on the right, and these are possible program matches. So here they're not organizations, but they're kind of service types. So in workforce, there are a variety of different kind of types of workforce providers. So there are folks that provide vocational training, which is kind of that hard skills training program. So like a welding program or something like that. But then there are also places where there's preparation and placement, so job readiness training, things like that. So these diamonds are all the different possibilities that folks may have and what they could be connected to. A couple things to note, and that did come up as part of the workshop, was that there are lots of places that people can fall through the cracks in all of these kind of buckets where you see this. So someone could fall through a crack where they're identifying they're at a community-based organization, they're identifying an interest in finding work, but then their case manager is unaware of something in the specific field that they're interested in or things like that. And there's just not a way that this is built that to really support that job seeker. Carrie, did I forget anything?
No, I think the takeaways are just important, were just as important as actually this mapping process, which is what Jennifer said, that the responsibility for navigating all of this is on really the person looking for a job or the frontline staff person that they might be working with wherever they show up.
All right, so Elizabeth, we can move 2 slides ahead. So the next thing that we did is we really looked at how do we develop a vision for what we would want to do to better align the systems, so the homeless services systems and the workforce systems, with the understanding that this is not a process where we're going to fix or the workforce side of it. So we had mapped out the workforce system. You know, it's difficult to navigate. It's not designed for the job seeker. But this vision is not necessarily fixing that workforce system, but fixing those places where folks could fall through the cracks, and specifically focus, at least at first, at folks that are coming through the coordinated entry system. So individuals that, so you'll see on the left-hand side, and we can go ahead and send this out at the end of this too. The left-hand side, you'll see that's coordinated entry assessment. So folks that are coming in that are completing a coordinated entry assessment and are being assessed for housing would also be assessed for their employment and income needs. So they would continue to be on the housing process in addition to being on the employment and income path. So what would happen is the top path is the SOAR services path, and the bottom path is the employment services path. So the SOAR services path, and these are not standalone. So these are for each individual, it could be something where they are in both paths at similar times, or they start on one path, end up on the other path, those types of things. So it's easy for us to put this on two distinct paths, but it doesn't necessarily play out like that, at least in kind of the vision that we're thinking about now. So I'll walk through the SOAR services. So SOAR services pathway, folks are then referred to a SOAR service provider, and they are sent to, so you can see those gray diamonds in there, so provider A through C, they're sent there, and a SOAR service provider is working with them on completing a SOAR application and providing kind of a referral and tracking process throughout that time. The bottom pathway is the employment services pathway. Folks are being referred to a system level employment navigator, and that's an actual person. So this navigator would then complete an assessment. So the assessment would be to identify a match for them for the type, so whether it's vocational training, job readiness training, those types of things, and an individual provider. So thinking about, are there providers that make sense in terms of geography? Are there ones that make sense in terms of the hours that training is available? Those types of things would all be in the assessment to discern the right match for that person. So the type and provider would be identified. They would then, the referral would happen. This would be, you know, a warm handoff, ensuring that folks are successful. And then there would also be a follow-up process to ensure that person made it there, as well as kind of tracking the success of that referral. All right, Carrie, do you have anything to add?
The only thing that I would add is just a reminder that we are trying to give a vision of what is the system level infrastructure that we need to have to support people getting connected from coordinated entry to one of or both of these paths at some point. So we don't know yet, that's the next step of this work, exactly what this would look like in practice. Like, where would the navigator be? Who would be the SOAR providers? How would we pay for that? This is sort of at a systems level. This is what it needs to look like, and this all needs to be supported and thought through and designed. The other thing that I didn't say at the beginning that I meant to say, because I say it usually when I do this presentation, is I think you all know that these are two things, so SOAR services and employment services for people coming through coordinated entry that have no public funding stream attached to them. So no dedicated resources that we can redesign to do better. We need to, at the same time we're designing these two things, we are needing to find the resources and capacity to do them. So I just want to, we are very cognizant of that, and we are also cognizant of the fact that we cannot expect the frontline service providers of housing services to just adopt this new set of responsibilities. That is not what we're trying to say at all. In fact, we're trying to say the opposite, which is bringing more resources for the purposes of these services. That's all I'll add. I
think it's you, Carrie.
Okay. Do we want to see if anybody has any questions up to this point?
Let's see, it doesn't look like it. I haven't.
Okay.
Nope, not yet.
Okay. You can go to the next page.
So I will say for those on the call, you can also type in your questions in the chat box in case you're not with a working phone or mic. I'll make sure to ask it on the air to Carrie and Jennifer.
Okay, so the next thing that happened in the workshop after saying, well, this is a vision, this is what we'd like to see, is that everybody had a chance to kind of weigh in on what is already happening right now, or what are some initiatives that we could build on, and or who are some people that we need to connect with that we aren't already connected to. And out of that sort of brain dump, really, like sort of what are all the things, Heather just sort of defined the work moving forward for us in these 5 buckets. So they're pretty general, but they are all necessary to getting to the vision, and they are equally important. So one is alignment of funding. So I will say on the workforce side, we could definitely make some improvements to align funding towards individuals coming through coordinated entry who want help finding a job. The same may also be true on the housing side of the equation. Streamlining access to services is another bucket of work. And this is really, asking ourselves the question, are we eliminating any delays? Are we matching people as soon as possible? And how can we do that to services? Are we asking the right questions, et cetera? The third big bucket is refining system performance, monitoring, and reporting. So this really speaks to, especially on the employment side, the fact that right now when people move through different parts of the workforce system, there's actually different performance requirements, there's different tracking systems, and is there a way that we can refine that using our existing systems like HMIS or the Career Connect system on the WIOA side that would improve our ability to know what is working and what is not working. And then the last 2 buckets are building the capacity to have employment navigators and building the SOAR capacity to have dedicated SOAR providers. These are not necessarily, especially on the SOAR capacity side, this has been a goal of the action agenda for the last couple of years. You can go to the next picture. Okay, so this is, just want to show you, this is our first draft at what the implementation infrastructure we would need to meet this vision. So again, this is all the work that needs to happen, all the types of work that needs to happen. And Jennifer and I have been co-leading this entire line of work up until this point. And now that we have this refinement where the work is essentially, if we're going to get to this vision, there's a lot that we have to do. One of the big capacity needs is actually a person to be project managing all of this work, because Jennifer and I both have pretty big full-time jobs, so we can't really do it justice even together. So when you look at this kind of implementation infrastructure, you'll see the colors actually make a difference. They mean something here. So anything that is green, any of those boxes that are green, is actually work that would fall squarely in the existing employment task force and or some sub work group of the task force. On the left, the orange box is things that are related to coordinated entry that we think has to be in conjunction or on the plate of the coordinated entry line of work. Same thing with funding alignment. So there's a funding alignment part of the action agenda work. And then SOAR has 2 existing work groups. And so the work towards this vision still falls squarely with those work groups. And then over on the right-hand side, building out a strategy specific to youth is something that we imagine is shared by the youth line of work and the employment line of work. So we'd have to figure out how that work moves forward. Underneath, and I'm not going to go through the light blue and dark blue, but the light blue are areas of work that are kind of new. Really, we haven't tackled this issue, especially in the governance question. And then the dark blue is actually work that already had begun or conversations that had happened already in a work group or in a task force. So for example, on the youth side, we have had a few conversations between the 2 lines of work, in particular looking at replicating the Inspiration Corporation research that they did last summer with adults and doing that with young adults and seeing what we learned from that and moving forward. But there's a lot more that could be done here. So I think I will stop there and see if there's any questions. This is really the conclusion of the content. The last couple of pages are just sort of what a potential work plan could look like, and there's no content, they're kind of just pictures. But we can say more about what the next steps are. But kind of want anybody's reflections or thoughts or reactions, questions about where something is that you think should be there if we're talking about employment and income.
If you do have a question, you can raise your hand so you can look at the control panel on the right-hand side and just click the hand icon, or you can type in your question in the chat box. It'll be more than happy to read it out loud. All right. Okay, so Tom is thinking of a question, so he'll pose it shortly.
Okay. So Elizabeth, is there anything that we missed that you think we should, that maybe we've talked about before in another presentation that we missed this time, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you did a great job of describing kind of the work that has happened with the youth line of action and how our 2 lines have kind of intersected, and we have developed a work group. Maybe telling a little bit more, how do you, if you do kind of already have something in place on how, that will that continue to go through a work group or kind of, yeah.
So right now, Jennifer and I have been talking with a number of different stakeholder groups about this work, and at the same time trying to find some additional capacity to help lead this overall. Before we have that capacity to lead this overall, we do need to move forward on some of these things. And the way that has, I'll just give an example. In each time we do this presentation with people or talk to stakeholders, we find out if people are interested in working on a piece of work here. And so then the next step is to get those individuals together and say, and we have kind of draft work plans for each of these verticals, and to sort of get people together and say, okay, is this the right way to proceed with this work? Do we have all the right people at the table, et cetera? So Jennifer is actually doing that with this public workforce line, which is an area that we've already done some work in, but is really sort of the beginning of thinking about the navigation assessment. And so she's pulled a couple of people together, a subgroup of people from the employment task force, and also people who, when we've done presentations, have said, I'd be interested in being in that conversation. I think the same is now true on the youth side. So we have had prior to this workshop, we had a couple of conversations, and we are following through on the Inspiration Corporation project. But I think the question is, would some combination of would there be sort of a shared work group potentially between the employment task force and the youth line of work, and what would work best and who could be there? I'd be interested in hearing about that. And we can start with the inspiration research, but also sort of look at the vision and think about youth and young adults in that context. Like, what would we want to be thinking about that would be unique to them, and et cetera.
Great. So we have a lot of questions. So
good.
Erin asked, can you say more about the Hearts and Minds campaign under the
sure.
bucket?
Yeah. So I'll say something, and then Jennifer, you can weigh in. So in the Employment Task Force, which actually the Employment Task Force was convened during the development of the Plan to End Homelessness 2.0, and it was just a task force to contribute some employment and workforce recommendations to Plan 2.0. And then the task force decided, everybody in the task force was like, well, we like working together and we have really good ideas and we're going to keep working together. And it became a standing committee of some kind. And we always saw it as our shared responsibility to sort of change the perception about whether people who are served through the COC can work or not, and to change the perception on the workforce side about whether people who are experiencing housing instability or homelessness can work or not, and how they can be, that they can be successful. So that's an example of sort of the Hearts and Minds campaign that we've always felt that we've been a part of. And now, but we just sort of felt that as our responsibility. And the reason it's light blue here is because this is really about a call to action, about the workforce, really the workforce system seeing it as in their interest. Well, it's actually both systems, as their interest to be working at a systemic level with the other system. And that, like, the perceptions about people and work, and the perceptions about work, workforce programs or work requirements, or, all of that are all the types of things that we mean. So it would be actually sitting down and kind of thinking about, well, who needs to believe in this? Who needs to be an ambassador for this? Who, as a systems leader or a civic leader, or, who do we need to reach, and how do we need to do that? Jennifer, did I miss anything?
I think the only thing that I would add is that we've talked a little bit about the workforce system is a bit notorious for being a bit a screen out service. So finding a way to, this is going to sound really harsh and it's not true across the board, it's totally generalizing, but to screen people out of services, to find reasons not to serve individuals at times. And so we've talked a little bit about changing the culture to be more of a screen in, and screening in for services, screening in to ensure that folks are getting the access to the services that they need.
You also had another question about, what about job coaches to help ensure successful placement as needed?
Yeah, I think that's right. That piece of the service package for individuals is necessary. So the job coaches, sort of retention services. So under the public workforce vertical, you'll see the 3 dark blue boxes. The first says more accessibility to work experience, which is really more accessibility to some of the high touch program models, an IPS cohort through coordinated entry, and scaling the IPS model. So all of these are we've had a supported employment work group in the employment task force, and all of these kind of fall into what that supported employment work group was trying to tease out, which is what are the successful high touch program models that include things like job coaching and retention services that have proven to work for people who might have more challenges than your average job seeker, and how can we expand those in Chicago for people getting referred through coordinated entry. So that's, I think those types of, in the employment task force, we have heard a lot about the types of services we need to make sure people have access to in order to be successful in employment. And we want to think about that whole package of services when we think about potential expansion of program models within the public workforce system. Sorry, if I could just add one thing to that, because it just made me think of something that has come up in the employment task force, which is this issue of doing assessments. We are firmly about only doing assessments where there's something to assess people for, not assessment just for assessment's sake. So we are simultaneously thinking about what is the best assessment tool to match people to the rights, as Jennifer said, to the appropriate service and the appropriate provider, but also making sure that that's what's on the other end. It's not like assessed and then referred into the void. So.
You have another question that asks, has there been much discussion of supported employment for people with disabilities, so that folks might pursue both the SOAR and employment tracks simultaneously?
Yeah, that has come up with every conversation we've had, and that was sort of the thinking about in the supported employment work group is we need to be thinking about both at the same time. And in fact, over the course of the entire, like the last 2 years, increasingly the employment task force and the SOAR conversations have come together. Like we want to know what the other is, each part of the line of work is doing, because we know that there are people who are going to want to do both. So for example, John, whose last name I forget, who's with the Social Security Administration, who oversees like the Ticket to Work and other programs, has come to the employment task force to talk about that approach, what the rules are and that kind of thing. So Jennifer, would you add anything to that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's been at the center of our conversation and thinking about, the models like supported employment, the IPS model, and really looking at how we can expand that to serve job seekers experiencing homelessness.
And I think Erin wanted to share that this might be especially relevant for youth who have a disability that is not quite managed and will want to re-enter the workforce once stabilized.
Great. Thank you. That's really valuable.
Okay, we have another question that asks, in addition to system navigators, has there thought been given to having job developers for recruiting employers and matching individuals to them?
Yeah, I think
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, so not necessarily as part of the system level intervention, but most workforce providers have the job developers embedded in their programs. And so thinking about, if we're helping somebody access those workforce providers, looking at do those workforce providers have the job developers and ultimately employer partners to be able to, match folks to. So I think that's part of the workforce side, not necessarily this kind of system level navigation to workforce. And Carrie, tell me if I'm wrong on that.
No, that's at this point, that's what it looks like. I mean, employer engagement does come up in the employment task force, but in this particular visioning, that's at the that kind of activity would be at a provider level.
So those are all the questions that have been submitted so far. If anyone has any additional questions, feel free to submit them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. Carrie and Jennifer, I think like it might be, you know, since people submitted their questions, I guess maybe they're wondering what comes after this presentation. What can they expect to see?
Yeah, so I think, Elizabeth, if you skip 2 slides ahead, there's just some little rectangles that talk about our next steps. And so the next step, so Carrie talked a little bit about this before when we were looking at the colorful kind of octopus chart. But at the top of that chart, the previous chart was both Carrie and I are currently leading this work. And so we're looking at how do we build out the implementation team. So Carrie, you know, finding some funds and building some capacity to bring on a project manager that thinks and breathes and lives this work on a daily basis is one of the things that we're looking at right now. The other is that we're looking at building out all of the implementation teams all along those boxes, so all along those verticals that were in that prior slide. And so if anybody is interested, we're happy to take their names, add them to the list, and get them involved in a work group. And so we can kind of start working on the work. The second box that's on there is about prioritization. And so thinking about if it is Carrie and myself and a bunch of other amazing volunteers that are invested in this work, but not a full-time staff person, what does that look like? Or if we are able to get a full-time program manager, you know, project manager, what does that look like? So kind of thinking about 2 separate things and prioritizing those 2 things. We've already started doing some work planning in some of the lines of work and thinking about what are the tasks that need to be accomplished, and then how are we going to implement that. So some of that is a lot of the mechanics work. So, you know, what we've been talking about today is really the vision for where we want to go, but the work groups will be kind of in the nuts and bolts of kind of thinking about the mechanics of all of that. So I guess our ask is if there are any volunteers that are interested, or if there's a specific line of work that looks appealing or something that you'd like to learn more about, that we're always looking for volunteers to help us out.
So Jennifer, I don't have anyone signing up for it just yet.
Oh, come on.
That would be a great match for this. Would you like for them to like reach out to you, or maybe you know, how would you like if they have maybe some staff that would be a great fit for some of, like, you know, there's the specific process that you guys have thought about?
We don't have
you can reach out. So.
Yeah, so you can reach out to either one of us, or Elizabeth, if you're okay, you know, if someone has your email and not ours.
Yeah.
You know, shoot Elizabeth an email, and then Elizabeth can pass that along to us, and we'll make sure we get you connected.
And if anybody is interested more in the employment task force, we do meet on the second Friday of every month at the Michael Barlow Center at St. Leonard's Ministries, which is Warren Boulevard and Hoyne, I believe. And it's at 9:30, and anybody's welcome to come. So that is available too.
Yeah. I know Erin.
If you want to check it out more.
Yeah, Erin shared that the night ministry definitely has some staff that might be able to join. So
great.
We'll be looking to
great.
See, some names from the night ministry to kind of join your group.
Fantastic.
That's great.
Oh, we have a hand raised. So Flora raised her hand. I'm going to unmute you, Flora. Flora, can you?
Just a very fat.
Oh.
Can you unmute me?
Yeah. Hi, Flora. You have a question for Carrie and Jennifer?
Yeah. It's really a very fast question. I couldn't figure out how to put it in writing. Just wondered when the youth employment group and what's the plans for how that's going to get implemented or timelines, because we definitely want to be part of that.
Great. Well, I think that we will check in with Elizabeth and Carrie about like maybe having a joint work group. We hadn't decided yet exactly how to move that forward. I know that prior to this sort of new vision, we talked about replicating the research that Inspiration Corporation did with adults, the interviews that they did. And I think Flora, you were in that conversation. We were going to do that with young adults. And we have somebody here who's going to revise the interview protocol with the Youth Advisory Board and anybody else in May. And then we'll move forward on that. But that's not the only thing that necessarily we have to be working on. So I think anybody who's interested in doing the youth work should just, the joint work should just let us know, and I honestly don't have a timeline yet because I'm not 100% sure exactly what all of our capacity will allow, right?
Okay. Well, Unity will be interested once we,
awesome.
In any aspect of that.
Great.
All aspects.
Great.
Thanks, Flora. Yeah, and we'll definitely bring up all these opportunities in our conversations or via email. And we also do the monthly youth action calls. So we'll definitely put that on Jennifer and Carrie's radar. So in the event that something is coming up and they would like to share, we also have those on a monthly basis.
Great.
And that's, community wide. So anyone that wants to join the webinar is happy to do so. Great. So let me just check one last time if we have any more questions. It doesn't look like we do. So any last thoughts, Carrie and Jennifer?
I don't have any. Just please, keep communicating. If you have questions or you want to be involved, just either through Elizabeth or emailing Jennifer or I directly is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you. So thank you for letting us come and kind of share this vision, and definitely kind of echoing what Carrie said, that there, if anyone is interested or has staff that might be interested or can think of other things that are happening around the city that we should know about, definitely let us know.
Well, thank you, Carrie and Jennifer. This was very helpful and great, work. I know that is a lot of work, and just the work plan. I know I've seen it. So we're very excited to be included, and, we believe that there is a very strong intersection. So, on a personal, I was happy that youth was one of them, because I know it comes up in a lot of our conversations. Thank you for doing this presentation and sharing the vision with us.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks. And we'll be in.
Bye.
Bye.
Great. Bye.